Good morning and welcome. My name is Erin Evans. I'm a senior manager in assurance at MNP Waterloo. MNP is a leading national accounting, tax, and business consulting firm in Canada. We proudly serve and respond to the needs of our clients in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, we provide a collaborative, cost-effective approach to doing business and personalized strategies to help organizations succeed across the country and around the world. This morning, I am pleased to welcome Stephen Dodd and Sam Smagala, who will be discussing cybersecurity and insurance. Stephen is a member of MNP's Forensics and Litigation Support Services team in Toronto. Drawing on more than a decade of experience in the insurance industry, Stephen works closely with his clients to provide a wide range of insurance advisory services. He helps businesses mitigate losses and return to normal as quickly and efficiently as possible. Stephen earned an MBA from Wilfrid Laurier University and is a chartered professional accountant and certified management accountant. Stephen's services include insurance claim and damage quantification, loss measure and business interruption calculations, as well as pre-loss insurance need evaluations. Stephen is a frequent speaker on business interruption at conferences for organizations such as the Ontario Insurance Adjusters Association and has given accredited talks for the Registered Insurance Brokers of Ontario and the Insurance Brokers Association of Alberta. We also have Sam Smagala, who is a senior manager within MNP's cybersecurity team located in Mississauga, Ontario. Sam is the first call when ransomware, data exfiltration, or any cybersecurity incident occurs. He guides organizations through from detection to response, resolution, and rebuilding. Sam is a graduate of Sheridan College's Bachelor of Applied Information Sciences Information Systems Security program. Sam continues to build and innovate the processes that the incident management practice employs. MNP's Cyber Incident Response service line provides both preparatory and post-incident activities, such as plan and playbook development, tabletop exercises, blue and purple team exercises, and hands-on compromise responses. Sam has acted as the primary technical lead and subject matter expert on cybersecurity assessments and incident response projects for various private and public organizations in government and industries such as retail, finance, insurance, manufacturing, computer, communication, utilities, healthcare, and business services. Please help me welcome Stephen and Sam.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate that. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So I wanted to also welcome everybody and, of course, thank everybody, especially the Chamber of Commerce, for our participation in this and having us here today. So I really appreciate that. As Erin was saying, we're going to be speaking about cyber risk and insurance implications around that, and I'm hoping that everybody does get a few takeaways out of today. So now that I'm sharing my screen, I believe. Just a bit of a disclaimer before we get into too far. Of course, things change rapidly, and I think I live and breathe rapid change, and just a bit of a disclaimer on that side as we learned today. But today's discussions are just based off of the current state as is. So, in terms of the discussion itself, of course, it's more of a free-flowing discussion on that side, but we just want to cover some major points: cybersecurity threat landscape and risks, which we'll learn about how it can impact your organization, how to really react to it, and go forth with a plan of action as well. Security plans in general, whether it's just from an organizational standpoint or more tactical perspective, what tools to use, etc. Just having those very brief discussions on how to think about things. We'll talk about the roles, people, and processes that technology play within cyber attacks itself, because we all have a role to play, and whether it's a small role or a large role, we've all have different objectives that we need to complete. So different types of level of insurance that could be implicated with an organization, and there are varying types, and Stephen will go into discussions on what to look for and what not to attach yourselves to as well, if it's not the right thing for you. And then we'll get into questions and answers. So I think we did the introductions on that side, and appreciate that, Erin. So we'll skip right over this. So current cyber incident, security incidents and risks. So what is happening now? So I think it comes as no surprise to anybody, and as ransomware discussions come up, the biggest topic that any cybersecurity professional will have will be ransomware. There's obviously varying other incident types that we want to stay out of the news for, but of course, ransomware is one of the top ones. So it doesn't show any sign of slowing down, even though we're going to the cloud, even though we're doing various migrations and trends, et cetera, different tools, technologies. There's always going to be a reason for an attacker to, number one, encrypt your systems or flat out delete them in order to hold you hostage. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, nor will it in the future as well. On that front too, and we'll discuss more in depth about how ransomware actually occurs, but from a very, let's back it up to the beginning of compromise and attack timeline. There are various stages that an attacker has to go through, and very commonly it's phishing, stolen credentials as being the most common methods of compromise that leads to things that, as I mentioned, want to stay out of the news for. Phishing being, well, there's an email that comes in, or it could be a sub side of it, a phishing email. Somebody phones you as well, tries to convince you to give them your password or just access to your system in general. We do see that rather often, actually. The stolen credentials as well, and whether it's through as our employees, staff members, etc., even ourselves, we tend to use personal accounts on our work laptops, etc., or use the same email address for Netflix, for instance, or some other lesser known application. A lot of the times we use similar passwords or the same password, password cycling, etc. Recycling, sorry. And attackers do know that. They try to, as soon as a breach comes up, say MyFitnessPal, for instance, back many years ago, they use those passwords to try to compromise the target domain. So just something to keep in mind about BYOD practices and how to keep your staff members and credentials safe, of course. So an interesting piece on, something that happens rather often. I get asked, well, what is the most victimized industry, and where does it occur the most, or how much impact is there? And, based off statistics here, we do see healthcare as being the most impacted industry in terms of how much a breach could cost. What I would say is, well, everybody is going to experience an incident at some point, and the dollar figure obviously can be a little bit descriptive based off your industry itself, but it's always going to be an impact that we need to be concerned about. So if you're on the public sector, maybe there's a reason to be positive that you're not in healthcare and sort of costing on that side, but nonetheless there will be impacts, and we need to respond to that, of course. So another interesting high-level question I get asked a lot too is, well, where is the most expensive country in the world to get a breach and response, etc. And it actually comes as a surprise to myself, even that Canada is number 3 on that list of being one of the more expensive places to have an incident, respond, and all the different costs involved with it. And we'll go into a bit of a discussion on where these costs are actually associated, but just an interesting piece is Canada's number 3 on that list out of all the countries in the world. So a lot of folks, especially when it is their first incident, they think it's going to be an overnight situation. They think it's going to be responded to and everything's cleaned up within a couple of days, if that, even sooner. That's the expectation that most folks should have, or have, I suppose. The reality is that these sort of breaches, especially large scale ones, they don't end within 2 or 3 days span. And the real mantra that I personally go into leadership meetings with when it is a ransomware incident as well. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And with that comes the concept of, well, it's going to be an ongoing thing. We're not going to be fixing things overnight. And also the costs as well take a bit of time to actually actualize, right? So for instance, as you can see here, within 200 days, you have your immediate response costs. whether that's, engaging third-party forensics firms or response firms, the immediate financial loss, should there have to be a payment to a ransomware threat actor, for instance. However, the post 200 days, you also get, well, maybe there's not returning, maybe our clients are not returning, or notifications are still ongoing, right, to privacy commissioners and all the back and forths, notifications to individuals as more information is coming out, numerous other things. And as well, you have to kind of plan for, well, we don't know what's going to happen, but at least we can make some educated guesses on things and just respond to it. But you do find that after the 200-day mark, there are still costs that come about. So you do need to be considerate of that. Hence, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So on the ransomware side, as I mentioned before, it's not magic. And as we go through this, it's not magic, right? It's not the red curtain that people think it is in various ways, and it doesn't show up overnight, right? I think that's an important piece, because we, as some organizations kind of find out, it's like, oh, it randomly popped up. So for the most part, and I'll step aside in the sense of, yes, sometimes that is the case of, literally in one night, and there are a few war stories where I've seen within about a 2-hour time frame where attackers have got into the organization, compromised everything, and got out. Those cases are very rare, but the most common part of this as well, they have to go through a number of steps to actually deploy ransomware, for the most part. And these are sort of the steps involved. They actually have to target your organization. And when I say target, it's more so as far as an attacker is concerned. They don't really care who you are. They will do that whole spray and pray method of, well, I'll send an email phishing attempt to 1,000 organizations. And if I get 2 of them to actually click on a link or provide a password where I can go in and perform next steps, then I've succeeded. And key point being 2 out of 1,000, right? So just consider one of your organizations as being one of those thousands, right? After that point, they do have to perform first foothold. That's when they kind of figure out who they're dealing with, the value of the organization as well. And interesting point here, as far as how operations go, they do a bit of a determination on the value of your organization, right? So if they're going to end up in their planning to steal data or encrypt operations, et cetera, for availability issues, they're actually just going to go to Google, type in your organization, and see what the revenue number is. They're going to use that as a bit of a guideline of, well, XYZ organization is worth, $3 million. I'm going to take 10% of it, and it's a reasonable business proposition for leadership and as well as the attackers. So it's interesting that we display certain numbers for our own market specifics, but eventually sometimes it comes back to bite us. So attackers become network admins. So I think one of the key points here too is they have to actually get through a number of hurdles and what they call escalate privileges, right? They have to get through those and have the appropriate privileges to actually, number one, exfiltrate data or copy data that is of value or not of value potentially. And then finally, deploy ransomware. So they need to get those administrative privileges. The spreading potential and pillaging is, well, now that I'm in the environment, what can I take? How do I do it? And it can be very rapid, as I mentioned before. An attacker can get in and out within a 3-hour range, and next morning everybody wakes up and everything's on fire. So with that, and I'll skip to poll number 2. I apologize, we missed our poll number 1, but we often see these as a generic ransomware encryption notes on laptops, workstations, etc. And for those of us who have not seen it, this is what it typically looks like. This is specifically for our Cuba ransomware group, which is a very long time ago. I think we may have poll number 2, which is insurance. But I think I was looking for, well, I'll roll with this. For ransomware operations and payouts, etc. We just want to take a look at, well, do we have insurance to help us on response payments, etc., or paying attackers, etc. And that's the full question here. Do we have cyber insurance? So I'll pause there, just so for people to actually respond to it. So one of the key parts about this too, and Stephen will definitely get into details of what cyber insurance is and the value proposition of it. From a cyber security perspective, and I'm personally a layman on insurance policies, and so we have Stephen, of course. But I would consider the whole insurance aspect a bit of the ace in the pocket, where should everything hit the fan, for instance, that maybe there is a bit of a reliance that we can use on this, but I wouldn't consider it our first stop of where we want to be going for operations, etc. We should try to look elsewhere in terms of preparation and those certain things. So, okay, so do that, and I think Stephen, if you're able to share the results, or I guess I can do that. Okay. So Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to jump in here and just speak about cyber insurance as well, or?
Yeah, so apologize. These polls kind of got a little messed up on our end, but I will definitely be talking more about cyber insurance in a few minutes. But it looks like only half of the people who responded are yes, they have cyber insurance. One of you said no, and then 2 people said they're not sure. So we'll get into all that in just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. All right. So I guess, and if my poll questions don't show up, basically that one was just supposed to ask, well, have we experienced a ransomware incident ourselves at a previous organization, for instance, or our current? So just think about that. Well, if you haven't witnessed this, then this will be your first introduction to ransomware notes. So consideration, well, I apologize, but I guess the illustration on how grand or how often cyber incidents happen, and oftentimes, unfortunately, we go through these things and think that we're the only ones that go through cyber incidents, for instance. But the reality is that we're all victims in this, and very often, as you can see from the bottom of the screen there, our team personally deals with everything on the daily, and do calls and various parts of organizations that are encrypted or exfiltrated or some sort of compromise that needs to be handled. And doesn't matter the industry, doesn't matter what your business proposition is, it will happen to you at some point. It's just a matter of dealing with it appropriately when it does happen, of course, and preparing before it happens. So, and with that, I mean, some more stats on this side too, and I think most of our participants here are business owners or have decision-making abilities, of course. So I think it's interesting to display what kind of concerns there are for cybersecurity at a brand level. And in terms of these sort of stats, cyber responders, CIOs, directors, obviously they have their own concerns. The most common concern that's our partner group Infotech kind of put together in terms of stats here was talent shortages. And I can personally say that it's very hard to find good people, and very hard, let alone to find people at all, which is interesting. But nonetheless, I mean, it is a bit of a problem. We do find a lot of organizations are definitely understaffed in terms of any sort of security at all. And depending on what industry you are in, we do see transitions of, well, we need to entirely outsource security rather than any sort of security internally, just because of the talent shortages, etc., and people are hard to find. So another one on this one that I see is becoming less of a problem, actually, which is good, but cyber risks are not being on the radar of executive leaders and board directors, right? So rather common actually, where we don't have any sort of cyber or technology speaking people, if you will, on a board of directors, but that is slowly changing. I do see that. And I guess the other part is, especially with my field and biases regarding it as well, I handle the organizations who haven't responded very well or prepared very well for cyber incidents. And oftentimes it is the first time that they're hearing of cyber incidents when something bad happens. But it is a risk on that side. We do want our leadership to be educated in advance so that they can make important decision makings of whether a ransom is worth paying or not, and the various background decisions on it. So another piece here, and this is basically a global trend that we do see, is the whole legislation aspect and the privacy, data concerns, operational uptime as well as being a concern for litigation and legislation too. But we do see, half of participants say that they are very confident in their legislation preparedness, and majority are not, or at least in the middle grounds of it. Oftentimes we run into situations, as I mentioned before, as biased with my profession, I suppose, but this is the first time that they kind of see cyber incidents and kind of prepare for it when something does happen, which is not the best approach. So something to sort out in advance. So, we went down all this path of stats and cyber incidents and ransomware, and really I want to get into, well, how do we address this, right? So what is cyber resilience and just cybersecurity in general? I think a good way to kind of describe it is, well, we have our operations that we need to keep up and running, keep the lights on. How do we protect that? And then we have our information that, obviously contributes to how an operation runs, of course. But information is sometimes the most valuable thing that we do have, obviously, which attackers like to compromise and exfiltrate. So how do we protect this accordingly, right? So, we could speak for hours and hours about different frameworks and different ways to go about cybersecurity, but at a very, very simple level, which I think is a good way to go about it, try to keep things simple, is identifying your crown jewels, knowing what operations are valuable for your business propositions, etc., your data, as well as being part of this crown jewels. The reason why data identification is being part number 2 there, as opposed to being identifying crown jewels, it's just a state of our current landscape. Really, it's just, well, we don't really know, at least as far as what we see. Most organizations don't know where their data is, the value of their data, and what they should be doing with it from a litigation perspective or regulation, right? So you have to take the time and effort to actually find out where your data is and where it's going and how to protect it accordingly. And then the business resilience side of, well, how do we actually respond to an incident should something happen? Because at the end of the day, we're doing cybersecurity to prevent and mitigate and respond to an incident, right? It's not finance check, it's for security. So I'll run through this rather quickly, but at the end of the day, I have staff and employee security awareness training, rather important. MFA, and I'm sure Stephen may mention this, but multi-factor authentication is rather important for preventing or mitigating compromise too. We're talking backups and business resilience, rather important. The offline copies are a challenge to succeed in, but definitely worthwhile. Logging, you can't respond to something you can't detect. It's just in principle, period. So you have to figure out if you're actually logging the right things. Monitoring for it, as mentioned before, you can't respond to something you haven't detected. And oftentimes attackers will go in at the middle of the night because they're often Russia, Ukraine, wherever else. And they go in at 9 p.m., 11 p.m., 2 a.m., those sort of things. And most people are not working. So you have to encounter those situations to handle appropriately. Incident preparedness, of course, having a plan in place and everybody knowing what their role is. So offline information. So part of that incident preparedness as well as having an offline version of the plan itself and all the different components that encompasses business resilience. So another big piece and a large trend that we are seeing is more so focus on third parties and vendor security aspects, and just kind of identifying what they are doing, your vendors, all of them, whether they're from a catering business versus, direct remote access to your internal environment. You have to understand what they're doing, how they're protecting themselves, and those sort of things too. The war story involved here is, well, if you are reliant on, an information technology services provider, and they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, or you don't know what they're doing when an incident does happen, there's not much you can do if they haven't been doing the right things to begin with. So better to determine all that out in the beginning. So before I get into the next part here, and I'll be rather snappy on that side, but just a pitch on this side, I suppose, is, well, security is, as I indicated before, it can be rather complicated, and hopefully I simplified it to those 1, 2, 3 principles of identifying your crown jewels, data, information protection, and then business resilience practices. But how to get there is more complicated, and that's where we step in. So a variety of services for compliance, although I hate that word, but security in general is where we help out on. So I'll run through this, as I'll try to keep it simple too, because there's a very complicated landscape of an incident response itself. But how do we, as an organization, and speaking as the Royal We, how do we respond to an incident effectively? And it really comes down to, number one, responding and able to detect what is going on, and actually doing it appropriately within a given time frame. And then doing the appropriate things after that. And typically it's, calling folks like ourselves immediately, calling your external counsel and legal and getting them involved, in insurance if it's applicable. You have to have that cadence and war room cycle, and speaking number 2 there, of, well, we're going to meet up every 24 hours, for instance, and try to win the next week, right? Having those cadence meetings. The rest of it is identifying, constituents you have to notify, communicate with, and speak to, and how to do it appropriately as well. So, and very simply as well, in response as a practice as well, you hear your technology response, which is root cause, investigations, and remediation side of it. You also have your management and leadership side of, as mentioned, the cadence meetings of how do we deal with boards, how do we deal with clients that are unhappy, for instance. Then you have the communication streams, which handles all the rest of, well, do we do privacy commissioner reports, etc., and what else can we do on that side? So various other things that should be done, and knowing this in advance is definitely helpful. But there are folks like us who can help you navigate a situation when it does happen. So I'm done with my piece there, so I'll hand it over to Stephen. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen, and Stephen, you're able to do that and share your screen. There we go.
I just want to confirm you can see that?
Yep. Okay,
great. So, like Sam said, I'm going to talk about insurance and try and tell you the most basic overview of a very, very complicated topic. So, a brief agenda for the discussion today. What is it? Who are the providers, and what are the costs of it? What does a cyber claim look like should the worst occur and you have to claim? And what should you do to try and be as efficient as possible and have this affect you in the least amount possible? So what is cyber insurance? And it's a standalone policy specific to the cyber world that is separate from your property or general liability policy. Now, insurance is a very, very old product, and cyber insurance is a very, very new aspect of that. 10, 20 years ago, you could get cyber coverage as part of your property or general liability policies. But now, like maybe 1 or 2 people still have it, but generally you don't. And like Sam said a few slides ago, insurance companies are wanting to make sure that you have an incident response plan, you have that multi-factor authentication, You're working with someone like Sam to develop a plan. If you don't have that, they may not even issue you the policy. So generally speaking, what you actually have coverage for is split between your first-party coverages and your third-party coverages. And I'll get into these in a bit more detail in just a little bit, but those first-party coverages are really damages that affect you, and the third-party coverages obviously are damages that are caused by the loss on your network to third parties. They can be employees, contractors, things like that. So the last decade, cyber insurance and cyber attacks have went from being relatively rare to happening all the time. So I read something recently that it's the Canadian market has just broken above 50% for having cyber coverage. And it's important because the joke that we have in the insurance industry was that 99% of companies had a cyber attack or claims since the pandemic started, and 1% are lying. So they have been massive since the pandemic started, and very important to kind of get your own policy and understand what it does. As a result of these cyber incidents, business interruption is the main cost driver of these claims. Now, business interruption is what's going to compensate you and cover you for your lost revenues while you were down as a result. And really, when you think about it, it's that loss of critical infrastructure or that customer data, your Outlook, your customer list, that's really crippling your organization. Right now, or at least a few weeks ago, these things change all the time, but the average amount of an insurance claim is around $4.2 million. And of those claims and of the cyber insurance world, ransomware is the most significant risk relating to those attacks. A few years ago, ransomware may have been in the thousands or $10,000, and now often in the millions. Sam was saying earlier that these people can just Google your company and determine what to ask for, and he's 100% correct. There's these actors are very smart in asking what they want for, and they know what they can get away with, and they're trying to get a number that makes sense both for the insurance to pay for it and the company needing to pay for it to get their business back up and running. And it's also ransomware may also be a screen for theft of data behind the scenes, which leads into different sort of insurance losses. Now, when you actually break down the costs of ransomware in the insurance claim, the restoration and expenses are roughly equal to the ransom demanded, while the business interruption is about 5 times greater. So again, that business interruption piece, that loss of revenue, the loss of customer trust is really what's driving these numbers. And there's also a new development, or it was new some time ago, it might not be that new anymore, but we've also heard of like ransomware as a service model, where individuals can go online, purchase a piece of software and launch these attacks very easily without any sort of computer science background. So getting into the actual cyber insurance, maybe the most important and the first part of the first party is the incident response, which is what covers your expenses in the event of a network security failure. And that includes, data breach, malware attack, cyber extortion, ransomware, business email compromise. I've broken it out here into 5 different sections. So first is the legal and regulatory costs. Do you have, personal identifiable information, or you're a healthcare provider, or you have some governmental regulations that are going to cause you expenses as a result of this? This cover will help you in that aspect. Second is the IT security and forensics costs. So when you need someone like Sam to come in and try and help determine how they got in, if there's a backdoor, if there's some sort of gap in your security, those costs are going to be covered for under that section. Next is that data restoration. So once you get your data back, or if you have to rebuild it, or if it's encrypted and you're trying to unencrypt it, those costs are quite costly, and then they're going to be covered for as part of this as well. And then lastly, the notification and the public relations are really 2 sides of the same coin. But you need to tell people that this is happening. You need to inform your customers that their credit cards may be out there. You may need to give credit monitoring. All these sort of things are kind of within that that bucket there. Again, on the first party, moving on to the ransomware extortion aspect of the coverage. You have the negotiation and payments of ransom. There are companies who exist now that specialize in this. They have experts who only deal with the negotiation of these ransomware payments. They have a stash of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to pay it, and they've probably worked with the attackers on the other side because of how often this occurs, unfortunately. And then the last first party covers is that business interruption piece. And like I said, when your system goes down or your network goes down, you need to recover those lost profits for that week, month, year, however long it is, along with any fixed expenses, any extra expenses that you incurred trying to get your business back up and running. Moving on to the third party side, the first one is that security liability piece. So, this really covers you, like I said, for any sort of damages you cause to third parties or your system causes as a result of being attacked, I should say. So first is that transmission of malware. Like maybe the attacker goes into your system and then that malware spreads to a third party. This will provide cover for you when they come back at you for those costs. Next would be your failure to prevent unauthorized access to information on your system. That could be employee information or maybe contractor information, maybe sales data for someone who shouldn't have it. Maybe your system is one of many that's being attacked, and you're actually part of a DDoS attack that's attacking another party as well. And then lastly, there's identity theft protection as well. On the privacy liability side, these types of covers, they cover sensitive customer information, employee information. So think of like SIN numbers, or if you're in the healthcare field, if you have like a health number or things like that. You may have contractual obligations to for different regulatory bodies that need to be considered. You have to be aware that there's time limits in place to adequately notify individuals of what was stolen, and get that third-party credit monitoring and let them have up to a year of that. And it can also provide defense funding if customers launch a class action against you because of the data breach and what was stolen. I'm going to try and put a poll question up here, and I'm hoping that it's the right one. So I got to be honest with you guys, our poll questions are not working out today, and I apologize for that. But I was going to ask if everyone was aware that add-ons are something you can get in insurance in general, but also specific for cyber insurance. So I just went through what the common covers on insurances are. These are some add-ons which I think are very helpful, and you should be considering when you look at your cyber insurance. So the first is reputational harm, and this effectively is because of the cyber event, your company or your brand has lost reputational value, and as a result, customers are leaving. We have a perfect example of this going on right now with this Indigo data breach. As I understand it, they are still down today, and the customers are leaving them in droves, basically, because of how long they've been down and the potential loss of trust between them and the customers. So if you think of a fire or a flood, if they damage your building, when the last nail is hammered, or the last bit of paint is put on, that's really when the loss is done, because your building has been rebuilt, and then you can go out and start your business again. Whereas with a cyber insurance, there's a very long tail, and this loss of trust takes a long time to get back. So this reputational harm add-on can recognize that continued business interruption resulting from the loss. Next is a computer replacement or bricking coverage. This is where due to the attack, your actual computer equipment has been permanently damaged and needs to be replaced. This coverage will provide like kind in quality to return the systems to the pre-event state. And it can be important if you're we'll say a legacy business that has some older equipment that was required to basically talk to maybe your suppliers or speak to some specialized contractor. This type of equipment can find that equipment again and get you the new ones, or can actually bring up your system to a place where everyone can talk moving forward. And then lastly, there's also social engineering, which is in the realm of cyber insurance, but is slightly different. It's really the business compromise emails or spoofing, which has employees transfer large amounts of money, pay bogus vendors, maybe pay the right vendor to the wrong bank account, but otherwise transferring money away from the company's bank account to hackers. There's an anecdote that I have, and not sure how true it is, but it works. And there was an American bank was going to buy a Chinese bank some years ago, and the CEO sent an email to the CFO saying, we're going to do this. Don't tell anyone because we don't want to spook the markets. So the CFO is kind of walking around with a smile on his face. The CEO doesn't really know what's going on. One day he just transfers out like tens of millions of dollars to this account in China. And finally someone comes to him and is like, what were you doing? And he's like, well, this email I got from you said to do this. And it's things like that, maybe not on the same scale, but it's issues like that this coverage can provide some cover for. Now, this coverage may be available as part of your crime policy, so it's important to understand exactly how they work together. But in our experience, these are moving more and more to the cyber insurance world rather than the crime policy world. So on a brief summary of what I just discussed, your policy is really designed to put you back in the situation you were in before the event took place within the coverages and limits of your policy. It's really crucial to have an expert review that policy and limits to ensure you have the appropriate coverages and enough insurance to enable you to survive the event. Between Sam's team and my team, we have the expertise to help you. Now, moving on a bit to cyber insurance providers and costs. I've put up here some that are we see quite often when we're dealing with cyber insurance claims and cyber insurance reviews. Most companies have some sort of product now, so these are definitely not the only ones. I've also put up some costs, which are ever changing, like it says, and highly variable depending on what the industry you're in is. But it does show that coverage is not cheap, and it's important to understand exactly what you're getting and exactly how it's going to affect you when you have to utilize it. As with all insurance, you need to be aware of your deductibles. You need to be aware of what is excluded. If there's any sublimits, there's potential that the 5 bits of coverages I spoke about earlier, they may each have a different sublimit. So your first party coverages may have $1 million, while your third party coverages may only have 500,000. It's important to understand how these are going to interact and how these are going to kind of play off one another. So what happens when you actually have an insurance claim? Well, first, you need to get your IT forensics and response experts in, and they can either be provided through your insurance company or through a third party agreed to with your insurance company. Now, since your insurance company is paying for this, it's important to agree to upfront who that's going to be. If you have someone that you really want to use, that you have a relationship with, try and get that written into the policy at the beginning, because it's a lot easier to do it before you need to than after you have a fire event, or in this case a cyber event, and trying to get it day of. The other expenses that are involved in this, the legal fees, your customer notification fees, data restoration, things like that, those are going to be paid according to your policy and according to the limits of those amounts on the policy. Now, while these amounts can be high, they're relatively simple. I mean, it's really just an invoice from the provider. They get paid once you account for the deductible, up to your limit. Where it gets complicated is that business interruption piece. Business interruption is really trying to predict the future and trying to establish what would have happened but for the cyber event. And going back to what Sam said about having the plan and offline records, it's essential to have these records of what happened in the past, confirmed contracts, confirmed orders that haven't been fulfilled. All these things may be compromised as a result of an attack. So it's very, very important to have these things offline so you can quickly refer to them, because the sooner you can get your claim into your insurance company, the sooner you're going to be able to get paid. So if I leave you with one thing or three things, I guess here, what should you do just to make sure that you're in a good place? And first is review your policies or your quotes if you're coming up for renewal, and identify that you have what you need, or if you have gaps, how you can fix those gaps. Second, as part of that planning process, make sure you have the appropriate insurance policy and limits. And you can do that by developing maximum probable loss scenarios to understand how the loss will affect you. So what does that mean is take a look at your revenues, take a look at your annual amounts and your customers and where you think it's going to be, not just today, but 12 months, 24 months from now. And if you were to lose everything, what exactly is that going to cost you? These are the numbers you need to know to actually go into an insurance quote situation and come out with the best product for you. And then, should the worst case scenario, when a loss does occur, we can work with you to develop and submit your insurance claim. And then once submitted, we'll even work with you to negotiate with the insurance company so that we're dealing with the insurance and you can deal with getting your business back to what it was before. So in a summary, cyber insurance is new, but it's maturing. It has many coverages. So just make sure what you have is appropriate for your business and your needs. And secondly, it can be very tough or impossible to gather documentation once your computer system has been affected. So have a plan in place and have offline storage to prevent this from occurring. And with that, I'm done. But I do have some pre-submitted questions that I just want to touch on briefly. So first is, what is the right coverage and amounts? And really, as I discussed, it's really unique to your business. You need to understand, one, what you need, and two, what you'd be comfortable with based on your premiums and based on the risk you're willing to take. Secondly, is it worth it, or should I self-insure? And again, that's really your risk appetite. As we said today, claim costs are well into the millions. So it can be tough for a business to survive that, depending on the size. So it's up to you if you have a plan in place to access the data offline and store offline copies so that you don't need to pay the ransomware and you can start your system over. That's really up to you. And then lastly is pay the ransom or not. And again, it's really a personal choice there, but can you survive without your data, or is your data so essential that you need to get it back as quick as possible? It's up to you. I know that there are certain public sectors which have made the decision not to pay, but in terms of actually paying the ransom, that's a choice of, one, how much, and two, if you can afford it. Sam, I don't know if you want to step in there or not to answer the ransom question.
Whether to pay the ransom or not, right? Every situation is definitely different. The immediate, or at least the most advisable way, what we always want to do is not pay the ransom, of course. And that's definitely our guidance and advice on that side. The reality is that sometimes we, especially if things aren't going the way they're supposed to, and the incident turns the way it is, and various circumstances exist where your back is against the wall. The best way forward really is to actually pursue a payment, or at least negotiate for that side. And the reasoning behind this is it's more complicated, or at least it can be more positive, if you will, in various ways, in the sense of, well, sometimes you actually want to be using a bit of a commentary for your constituents, stakeholders, and whoever else is really concerned about their own data. where you have that statement of, well, we did everything we could to protect the data. Like, we know that the incident happened and various things were not done by the organization, but we're taking every possible step towards paying. Right. So I would say that certain circumstances do exist where that is the best course of action. But as mentioned before, we want to avoid that altogether, hopefully, by doing appropriate things to begin with.
Yeah, thanks. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. If you have any, please submit them now. If not, I think I speak for both Sam and myself when I say thank you for allowing us to speak to you today. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're happy to take your call and discuss this area. But if not, I will say thank you, and hope you have a great rest of your day.